All right, our next guest currently working on a Senate bill that would immediately refreeze the $6 billion that Joe Biden and his administration is now making available to Iran as part of this ransom payment for 5 American hostages. 2024 presidential candidate, Senator from the great state of South Carolina, Tim Scott is with us. Senator, great to have you.
Thank you, Sean. It's always good to be back on your show. 2 hours. I love it.
Yeah, I do too. But I don't get those. Honestly, I wish it was different circumstances. I wish this could be a fun, raucous, rowdy. We have a crowd here tonight, but it's so serious. We're talking about human lives at stake here, and it's the seriousness of the moment that brings us together. You know, and that goes to the heart of what I was just discussing with John Ratcliffe, and I'll ask you the same question. The fact that you, Marsha Blackburn, and others have to put forward a bill. Why hasn't Joe Biden already said, you're not getting the $6 billion? Why are they so reluctant and resistant to the idea that that was a bad deal and a bad idea, that giving the number one state sponsor of terror this money? Why do we have to force that upon them? That should be, to me, a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, Sean, you know that you cannot make a good deal with a bad actor, period. One of the things I've been saying since Saturday is that Joe Biden is complicit with these attacks. Why? Because when you are weak, you invite attacks. When you negotiate and give $6 billion to Iran, who is 90% of the funding for Hamas comes from Iran. Those breadcrumbs are simple. It is impossible for the common person to come to any other conclusion. But in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden and his administration, they are uncommon and not in a good way. The challenges that we see today is that when you give $6 billion to people who fund terrorism, you cannot be surprised when they go and do what they always have done. But I gotta say this, Sean. When $6 billion is paid for hostages, you have actually created a high-value market for Americans to be taken as hostages. And we pray that they come home, and we should do everything in our power to bring them home. But this administration has blood on their hands because they are complicit. We need to freeze those assets and send a message to the world that we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. And there is no daylight. But if you take an American hostage, it should cost you your life.
Let me ask you this. I tried to get Vivek Ramaswamy to answer this question. Should the world now factor in, we keep getting report after report after report that Iran is on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons. We know that their nuclear facilities, it's a very large, geographically speaking, it's a very large country. We know the location of these nuclear facilities. We know many of them are buried deep, deep underground. And for Israel to take out their nuclear capability, they would probably need U.S. assistance in the form of our bunker buster bombs that would prepare the way that would ultimately create an opening for them to destroy those facilities. Should America take on that role? Does the world need to deal with this reality that radical mullahs in Iran can never have nuclear weapons because that will be the real existential threat that Joe Biden denies? He said even nuclear war isn't as dangerous as the existential threat of climate change. I mean, probably one of the dumbest things a U.S. president ever said. And they stood by it this week.
Unbelievable.
But should we at least provide the bunker buster bombs to Israel if they decide that this is in their survival's interest, their national interest, to protect them and people in the region? Should we provide those weapons? If you're president, would you provide them?
Sean, we should listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the resources and the weaponry he needs, we should provide. But this story goes back to the Obama administration. The JCPOA, that nuclear deal, was a disaster. And what happened right after the signing of the nuclear deal? We saw Iran literally testing mid-range ballistic missiles. That was in violation of the nuclear deal. So the one thing we know is that created a pathway to a nuclear bomb. Number two, we know that they have continued and advanced centrifuges, trying to make sure that they have more advanced centrifuges for one purpose, from my perspective, that is a nuclear weapon. Number three, they have created not just a disruption, but they tried to annihilate, in my opinion, through funding terrorism to Hamas. They're trying to annihilate not just a Jewish state, but if you understand Hamas's philosophy and their doctrine is not the end of just the Jewish state. It is the elimination of Jews on earth, giving Benjamin Netanyahu the resources, the weaponry, and our backing to finish the task at hand, and watch them then thereafter turn their sights to all the supporters of terrorism against their state is exactly where I would stand as President of the United States. We should support their mission until it's over.
You know, these are very important times for the world. We've got to get these things right. At the very least, the financial support of Iran, most of their money is coming from energy, oil. Would it be smart for people in the Middle East, maybe smart for Israel to take out their refineries at least, if they don't go as far as taking out the nuclear capability?
Well, we should certainly see a high reaction to what has just happened in the Middle East, and having our allies and, frankly, the Abraham Accords that we celebrate. Watching that coalition come together is one of the reasons, in my opinion, when Saudi Arabia starts negotiating with Israel to have a normalization of the relationships, you see Iran and Hamas go into action to disrupt what's happening in a positive, constructive way for Israel. So making sure that we attack the energy sector is an important consideration. One of the things I've done, Sean, back in May, before all this happened, I had a bill to make sure that the sanctions on their energy sector did not end in 2026. I will reintroduce that bill next week to make sure that we get what I started in May finished. We should make permanent the sanctions against Iran and their energy sector. And whatever happens after that, from a kinetic perspective, may actually help us achieve the goal of making sure that Iran is never a nuclear power.
All right, we appreciate your time. Senator Tim Scott, presidential candidate, we always appreciate you being on the show, sir. Thank you for being here. When we come back, Americans are being held hostage by Hamas terrorists. What is the Biden administration